Welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast by two geeky friends of a certain age, talking about the development of geek culture over time. We were geeks before it was chic. I am your co-host, Stephen Taylor, and I am ready to make it so.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Grant, and I'm ready to make myself into a so-and-so.
Sure. So this week on Ancient Geeks, we're continuing our conversation about the development of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Last week we talked about sort of the state of Trek in '87, and today we're going to talk about initial lead up to the actual premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation in 1987.
Right. And we had to split up our original recording of this into two episodes because we
Because
just went a bit long.
we're long-winded, and there was a lot to talk about.
It's a
So
long journey across the Alpha Quadrant. It takes a while.
I would say it's a long way getting from there to here, but it's the wrong show.
I know, I know. But anyway, so we're just going to
Uh,
drop back into the middle of the episode that we were
yes.
recording and take it from the point where we had finished up the state of Star Trek in 1987, and now we're moving on to our first impressions of the Next Generation.
Precisely. And then next week, we'll talk about the actual first season of The Next Generation.
All right, so here we go. So let's now finally get to Star Trek: The Next Generation. So here we are, big Trek fans. We're playing the games, we're reading the books, we're buying the
Right?
comics, we're
Right.
doing all these things. And then we hear that, there's going to be a new Star Trek series. First of all,
Yes.
at that point in time, did you feel like Star Trek needed something new, even before you heard about the new TV series?
I wanted it. I don't know if need is the right word, but yeah, I mean, I felt like there was more to do on the small screen, and was certainly hungry for that. So in that sense, sure.
But to sort of like Star Trek more generally, like, did you feel like it was getting stale, tired,
No,
whatever
I don't
the
mean,
adjective would be?
no, I did not. I felt, in fact, I felt like the movies had created enough of an interest and an impulse for more, that there was more room to play with rather than being stale and needing something to unstale it.
Right.
Freshen it up would actually be the phrase for unstaling. But anyway, yeah, I didn't,
Desailing.
the destale it, set destale this for maximum.
Yes, if
Mr.
these
Taylor.
episodes go on a little long, then
We
words
needed
be
destale.
hard.
Words be hard. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So
Did
we
you think
heard
it was stale? Do you think it was stale in
no, not at
1987?
all, not at all. I mean, I was pretty happy with
Yeah.
where Star Trek was. Did you see the original teaser?
You sent me the one that aired on Channel 13 in LA. I'm sure I saw it. It seemed familiar. I mean, it was only just under 40 years ago. So if I can remember what commercials I saw on television, but I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I did too, and it was sort of a WTF moment. Like, what did I
Yeah.
just see? Because it was mostly footage from the
Oh, it's
movies.
all footage from the movies. Almost all. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they came out with other versions of it. There were
Yeah. Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
trailers, and
Right.
then like you saw the Enterprise, you saw the actors and so forth.
Yes.
Did
Yes.
you see
Yes.
any of those trailers before you saw the show?
I think I did. I'm pretty sure that I did, but I do not remember. I mean, I was probably watching reruns of TOS on Channel 13. I'm sure they aired during some of that. Sure. I just don't remember for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I dug up that trailer, which was done by the
Yeah.
same guy who did the
Yeah.
voiceover as did at the end of every episode the preview of the next
Yeah. Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like it was such a distinct part of the experience of watching Star Trek in the first season. Next time on Star Trek: The Next
Yes.
Generation.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yar,
Yeah.
an android.
Yes. Yeah.
So had you like, I mean, had you seen any of these interviews with the cast beforehand, or any other sort of advanced
I mean,
material?
I'm sure I've seen certain things over time. I'd not seen that again. That very the wavy video of
Yes.
Marriott Hartley interviewing the entire TOS cast. I had not seen that. I remember seeing some stuff at the time, but not a ton. Um, had you had a memory of any of that stuff?
No, I don't remember seeing anything.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing. I remember seeing a trailer. I remember seeing the teaser that we talked
Yeah.
about, the kind of the weird abstract sort of
I mean,
approach to teasing the show, but I
yes.
didn't see any of the interviews as far as I know.
I do. Here's, I guess, what I do remember. I mean, I remembered in print knowing this was coming. I think Starlog was the first time that I saw
Yes.
any real information. I may have seen something in the newspaper um, that we used to have delivered to the house on a daily basis in the weird olden times.
Right.
I remember seeing who the cast was going to be and not really barely knowing any of them, knowing a couple of them. And just being interested in a new show, knew it was going to be set in the future. I knew that part. Well, the even further future.
Hmm.
But and I'm sure therefore I saw those commercials already knowing it was coming. I know I didn't like, oh, I found it on TV. I found that in print. And I think I do remember seeing those commercials, realizing that they were all movie clips, which is funny because they kind of did something similar with Discovery. One of the first Discovery trailers showed some scenes from one of the movies.
Yes.
Like, so it's like just picking out random
Well, it
graphics.
wasn't
Anyway,
wasn't a time when any sort of preview materials went into a great deal of depth. I
that's
think that's
true.
a big difference between Hollywood then and Hollywood now. Is now
Often, yes.
you hear all about, the movie, and you see
Yeah, yeah,
clips, and you see on the set,
yeah, yeah.
interviews with the actors
Right.
ad nauseum, which there was always some of that, but it
Yeah.
feels like there's a lot more of it. And
Well, it's just
and
so
in
much
this case, for
more.
example, like I didn't even know that David Gerald, who, for
Yeah.
those listening who don't know, was the author of like one of the most beloved original series episodes, The Trouble
He
with
wrote the
Tribbles.
he wrote no, he wrote the alternative factor. No, I'm kidding. The most beloved episode of all of Star Trek.
Most beloved in hell. Uh, but I didn't know he was part of the creative team.
Yeah, I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't. I think maybe I did know that DC Fontana was involved. Um, but I mean, again, part of it that is, I think, just the nature of the media environment, right? I mean, in 1986, when this was being maybe prepped, or maybe it was in 87, because it didn't premiere until the fall of 87. So let's assume that they roll out the all the promo stuff,
Hmm.
and they're going to go on TV shows to promote themselves. Well, there's
Right.
only it's Johnny Carson, right?
Yeah.
At night, and was Arsenio around at that point? Maybe. Um, I'd have to
Yeah.
look it
Not a
up.
lot of venues.
There weren't. Maybe that was during the 6 weeks that Pat Sajak show was on. I don't know, but it was just like there weren't. Every network didn't have a show. In fact, every network didn't have maybe even two shows. And of course, then there wasn't all the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
Maybe you saw something on Entertainment Tonight. You
Phil
know,
Donahue.
you're not gonna send a JLP onto Phil Donahue. Come on. But
That would have been an extremely memorable show, I
yeah, it
would
would
have
have
to say.
been. But I mean, seriously, it just really the now there's so much promotion of stuff, and
Yes.
then again the whole thing with clips, and I mean that's been around for a long time. I guess you had Letterman. Letterman was around
They'd
then
give
too.
away a lot, right?
Yeah,
It seems impossible nowadays there are exceptions, but impossible to imagine
yeah,
not knowing a lot about a particular new TV show or movie
right.
well in advance.
Yeah, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
And plus, if you really want to know something, now you just put it in the Google bar, and then you find things out.
Yeah. Did it seem weird that it wasn't going to be on one of the major networks?
I do remember that being like a novelty about it. I don't know that it was weird per se, but again, back in the day, in the
Hmm.
mists of ancient time, when all news shows of any consequence were on ABC, CBS, or NBC, maybe Fox has premiered at this point. I can't remember. Thereabouts, about the same time frame. But yeah, the idea that it would be on some random channel at some different time, and not always the same time in all the markets. Like
Right.
I remember that my friend, who was my best man at my wedding, who flew out to California from Texas, had already seen Best of Both Worlds Part One, and then we watched it again on Channel 13 that evening when he flew in because he'd already seen it the day before in Texas, just because that's the
Okay.
way it works.
Yeah.
He didn't spoil anything to his credit, but he did say it was something of an ending, and he wasn't wrong.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't an
But
era with a lot of spoilers, too.
no, not
Yeah.
like now.
Like, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just remember briefly being concerned that the show was being marginalized for some reason.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had
That
no
was a
idea
concern.
that it was actually a smart business decision to go
Yeah,
straight to syndication the way
that's
that they
fair.
did.
Yeah, I think, and of course, it's all changed even now. But I mean, syndication sounded like a failure, is what it sounded like in
Yes.
1987.
Yeah.
There's something was wrong with your show.
Right. It was
It
low
was,
quality.
yeah,
So
exactly.
therefore, is like the version, like the version in the 80s of going straight to video.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
That's totally fair.
Yeah. So we basically went into this cold.
Yeah, yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Very, all just a little tiny bit, right? I knew who was cast and I knew what their names were. That was it. And it was
Right.
going to be the Enterprise.
Yeah. So of the details that we knew, we knew that it was going to be set decades after the original
Right,
series.
right.
Did you like the idea? Did
I
that
mean,
work for
I
you?
was totally fine with that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I was perfectly fine with it. I did not need to have sort of ironclad continuity with characters and
Right.
situations and so forth from the original series for it to be a Star Trek show that I would enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. I was
I
perfectly
didn't
fine with it
feel that.
being, I
Yeah.
agree.
So what if they had done a prequel instead of
I mean, at
a
the time,
sequel?
I would have been fine with any new Star Trek, but I'm glad they didn't do a prequel. And while I have some affection for the prequels that they have done, I still wish they would do something next.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah, I would have felt like it was forced. I really did like the idea that they were free to do whatever they wanted, uh,
Yeah.
story-wise and character-wise with the new show. One thing we did see before watching the show was the Enterprise.
Hmm.
What was your reaction to seeing it for the first time?
It's hard to remember exactly what I thought. I mean, I think in general, I was just excited by anything that was happening. So I was excited to see a new ship. I I prefer the original Constitution class ship. I still do. I find
Hmm.
I'm not a big fan of the some of the curves of the D, but I like the ship fine. It's just not my favorite one. How about you?
I just thought it looked weird to begin with. I mean, it grew on me over
Right,
time. And same
right.
thing. I mean, I liked the way that the original Enterprise sort of evoked a sailing ship with
Mm,
the
hmm.
engine nacelles up high.
Yeah,
And anyway, but it was fine. It really did signal that there was a good probability things will be significantly different in this
right,
show. And
right.
it didn't freak me out. I just was intrigued to find out.
No, no. I mean, I know a lot of people that Next Gen is kind of their original Star Trek. And so I think they have maybe more affection for the Enterprise D than I do. It's not in my pantheon of ships, it's kind of down the list to be honest. I like it better than say the
Yeah.
Excelsior class ship. But I don't like the curvatures as much. I like the lines on the both the original Enterprise and the upgrade. I prefer those. Those are my favorites.
Right. But it was important because the Enterprise is a character
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean it's a
on
great
its
ship.
own.
I do
Yeah.
like the ship. It's just not my favorite
Yeah.
one. That's
Yeah. I had heard about the families being on the Enterprise.
yeah. I never liked that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about the reason behind it, that it was because they were going to be in space for 15 years,
Right.
uh, which they basically dropped.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, and then you were left with these families being on board, which like really, what is the point of that? Other than to sandwich, it seemed like an excuse for sandwiching in a kid as a main character.
No, I agree, and I think it was this. I think it hits a problem of almost all Star Trek. Um, Not the families per se, but this 15-year mission thing that that hit a memory. You know, I don't remember. It's not said in the show, right? Is it?
Yeah, I don't think so.
It was said on that interview with Patrick Stewart and Marion Hartley, and I think seen that somewhere else.
Well, it would have
Uh,
probably come up in Encounter at Farpoint, but I don't remember from our
I don't remember it being
rewatch of
said.
it that
I just
that
recently
being
where so but there is TOS suffers the least of this of all the shows, but TNG suffers from it quite a bit, and Stranger World suffers from this, and some of the other shows do too. Which is, on the one hand, they're supposed to be on this deep space mission, yet somehow they're often in familiar territory, and they can't make up their minds. They
Right.
never they never seem to be totally boldly going all the time. They do occasionally boldly go where no one has gone before, but sometimes they're kind of like sort of going where people have been recently, or they
Hmm.
happen they're near the neutral zone when they need to be, or they're near Earth when they need to be, or they're near it
Well, they're
doesn't
always an instantaneous communication. It's
yeah.
not a big journey for them to get back to Earth even.
They do make a big deal in Encounter at Farpoint that it's a Galaxy class starship, which I took to mean in the way it's said in Encounter at Farpoint. It's not just that it's the name of the ship's
Yeah.
class, but that it was literally a galaxy spanning ship. That's the way they made it kind of sound in that
Hmm.
opening captain's log and Encounter. And they never quite do that. It always, I think, what TNG and Strange New Worlds are only going to pick on right now, they really do. Supposedly they're off on this mission, but they're often just too local too often. And that
Right.
I
Yeah.
think was an ongoing problem. But I mean, it's
Yeah.
not a huge deal, but
I mean,
it
there's
affects.
yeah, there's no way of undoing this.
No,
But I really liked in the original series, this didn't always work.
right?
They changed this from episode to episode. But the
Hmm.
ones where they said, we're way out in space.
Yeah,
It's going to
exactly.
take weeks for us to hear back from Starfleet
That's right.
Command. We're basically on our own. I liked that motif a lot.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, right? That there should
Yeah.
be more of that.
Mhm.
There should have been more of that in TNG, but because even watching some of the first season, and I watched a couple that we weren't on, we'll talk about that later. But I mean, we
Yeah.
had some we were specifically going to talk about, and I watched some other ones just because. And it doesn't quite have that feel of it never had the feel that I wanted it to have, which we really are out here exploring.
Right.
It felt like they had a different mission actually often. It was often like because if you got to take Ambassador X to Planet Y, then you're like an Uber and you're local, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Or
they
it
did
was a
some of that.
first contact situation, but you knew the aliens were there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It just so there was some of that missing, and then again with the family part. Yeah, I felt like the family part was some combination of long-term mission that never paid off, a reason to have Wesley on board, and also to like create another kind of drama. Oh, the
Hmm.
captain hates kids, but he has kids. I have a boatload of children, or whatever. That's actually a Star Trek 3 quote, but or sure, 2 quote actually. But the it didn't ever work for me, and at some point it seemed really irresponsible. Um,
So
in fact, part
here's a
oh, go
nightmare
ahead.
scenario.
Yeah,
What if Starfleet had said, "All right, we know you're going to be out in space for a long time, but we have a holodeck, so we could
yeah,
simulate your family for you."
yeah. That's not good.
I think that would have been a mutiny right there.
Yeah, I I can kind of I don't know. It's
Mhm.
part of the problem. Again, and again, my Star Trek bona fides are well established, so I can point out problems. Trek suffers from the fact that the Starfleet is both quasi-military and I know we talked about this before, but it
Right,
creates these kind of weird problems, right?
right.
That
It
the same starship that's going to put families on it because we're going to go explore planets is also the starship you're going to put between a Borg cube and the Earth. That just really doesn't make sense.
yeah, no, no.
Anyway, that's all right.
All right. So we were not fans of having families on the
No,
Enterprise.
no,
The
it
end.
didn't work.
Yeah. So there was a lot going on behind the scenes at the time. I don't know if I would have cared to hear about all of this. It
Oh,
kind of
you
again
mean
the way that you have transparency into
yeah,
movies and TV shows being made today. Like there was the Bible that we
yeah,
referenced before. So Roddenberry had to put together a document that was sort of the constitution of
right.
the show, that it would kind of make sure everybody understood how things worked, who the characters were supposed to be, and so forth. That never got leaked outside, as far as I remember. I only
I was
just
aware.
saw it. Yeah,
I was aware that it existed. I mean, there's a Bible for all of the shows, including the original.
right.
I guess it was standard practice for TV shows to write a Bible for writers so they know the basics of the characters and the context. But I don't think I've ever seen this version before, although I was aware that it existed.
Yeah. Roddenberry was heavily involved.
Yeah.
This was his show, and he had a very kind of strict set of boundaries about what he wanted out of the show. Uh, he was very defensive about that. According to a lot of the accounts now that are available
Yes.
in
Yes.
books and documentaries and so forth, very controlling, rigid. A lot of struggles behind the scenes between him and a lot of the producers, or
Yes.
the people like David Gerald and others
Yes.
who were the kind of the people with creative control. A lot of writer turnover
Hmm.
that was happening in the show. A lot of burnout among people because of the very arduous production schedule. Um, had no idea about any of this. All I knew it was Star Trek, and Gene Roddenberry was involved, and there were a bunch of names of people I didn't recognize before. But it wasn't at a time when like you would go back and find out like who is this Maurice Hurley guy? What other shows
Right.
has
Right.
he
Right.
worked on? It didn't factor a lot into my experience of the show.
I was aware at some point, and I don't know when it was that I became aware that there was some conflict and that Roddenberry had a particular vision that maybe was at odds with some of what other people want. I think I knew early on that he didn't want any conflict between the human characters on the show.
Hmm.
And it became evident that that was not necessarily a good choice.
Right.
And I certainly that get ahead of ourselves in the timeline, but I know I became aware that there was a correlation between Roddenberry's involvement and the quality of the show, and the relationship was inverse. So that
Yeah.
by season three and onward, the show got better. And I think at least part of that was his less of his influence, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Even, but, and then some of the people you're talking about, like Hurley was, no, he was involved in season two. And Hurley did some good stuff actually, but there was the attorney that was, I forget the guy's name right now, who
Yeah.
was a
Leonard
problem.
Maizlish.
Yes, that's the one. I think he was gone by the end of first season, but there was definitely conflict, and I think it. We'll talk about episodes later, and
Hmm.
there are good things to say about season one, but there's some definite deficiencies, and I think some of this um, creative tension is reflects on the quality of some of the output.
Yes.
I would love to have seen a season one that really was run by DC Fontana, for example. I think that would have been a better season one.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, for example, Denise Crosby famously wanted to get out of the show because her
Hmm.
character wasn't going anywhere. And I could really see that being a casualty of these conflicts in the making
Yes,
of the show. That
agreed.
because they couldn't agree over what to do with her, she basically did nothing.
Right. That's right.
Okay. Well,
Um,
that's a good segue
Agreed.
into talking about the actors. So we also had heard who the actors would be. Did you
Mhm.
recognize any of them?
So I was aware. I mean, I knew who LeVar Burton was because of
Yeah.
Roots,
Yeah. Everybody knew
and
Roots at that
he
time.
was the
Yeah.
one that was. Even though we didn't watch Roots, but I knew of it. I knew who he was. I knew he was Kunta Kinte. It was like I knew
Hmm.
that. And I think I'd not seen Stand By Me, but I'd heard of Will Wheaton. I think
Hmm.
that was it. The rest of them were ciphers to me. How about yourself?
So I definitely knew LeVar Burton.
Uh-huh.
I knew, yeah, I knew that Denise Crosby was the granddaughter of Bing Crosby.
Yeah, I knew that name. I knew the name.
Yeah, it's Hollywood, right? If you see a name
Right.
you recognize, it's probably there's a familial connection there.
Right.
I really knew Patrick Stewart because I was
From Dune.
no, not from Life Force either. It was because of I
Oh,
Claudius,
that's right. That's
the
right.
BBC
That's right.
series, where he
Right.
played such a memorable character in that.
Right.
And that really ratcheted up my excitement because I
He
loved
played
him in
I,
that.
didn't he?
Yes, he did. And then there was Claudius. It
That's
was a
right.
two-man show.
That's right. Exactly.
So anyway, that was a real uh, uh, element in kind of raising my confidence in the
Hmm.
series. That you got somebody that good as an actor
Right.
to be the lead character. Um, did you did you want any connections to the past? through the characters themselves, like somebody to be
Yeah,
related to
yeah, like
somebody, or
Jimmy Jr.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
Bob Sulu.
Bob's. I don't remember thinking about that. I think that I was fine that there wasn't. I have comments about how they treated TOS in season one. We'll talk about that later, though.
Yeah,
But I don't recall there being any sort of like, well, yeah, why isn't, somebody got a last name from the previous show? I think the only thing I noticed at the time was the lack of a Vulcan character.
right.
But I'm not sure I had to have one. I just noticed that that wasn't there.
Yeah, I had no need to
Yeah.
somehow connect familially or
Hmm.
otherwise characters in the next generation to the original series.
Hmm.
None whatsoever.
This
Uh,
shocks me because you're such the nostalgia guy. You just like always wanted
oh
to have
God.
like, no,
Well,
I
it
know.
drives
Yeah.
me nuts.
Yeah.
Whenever we do it, like Star Wars does this too much, Star Trek
Yeah.
nowadays does this too much. I don't care. I don't care. It's a big universe. I don't
Mm,
need to have these
right.
connections to like what is it sort of aside from nostalgia bait, it's like trying to reassure people it's going to be okay.
Oh,
You know,
that's that. Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you have a good reason, maybe. But yeah,
right,
I just assumed that it would be the
right.
literally the just a, it's what 78, some weird number. It's not even 70. It's like 78 years in the future or whatever. I mean, yeah, I assumed that that
Yeah,
would not be.
it's not Hikaru Sulu, it's Bob Sulu. So everything's going to be just fine. Okay. We're gonna talk about the characters in more detail when we go through the episodes, but just sort of like we had our first brush with the characters in the pilot, and and
Right.
in the first couple of episodes. Let's go through all of them. If you had like a word to start to describe Picard, your initial reaction to him, and then
When we first
extrapolate
saw
on
him,
when you first saw him.
uh, I'll get fancy and say taciturn.
Oh, there we go. Fascinating, fancy.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's funny, like when I was reading from the Bible, distinguished. He did
yes.
seem distinguished.
Yeah, I didn't get. I mean, I know that they make a point that he is a veteran, but I didn't get the sense that he was like this celebrated captain in the counterpart point, the way the
No, I mean,
Bible makes him
I
out to
just,
be.
I think more distinguished in his carriage,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
than his resume.
Yeah, that's no, that's definitely the case. But I mean, the Bible makes it out to be that he has an impressive resume as well, which is
Right,
not as evident.
right.
One thing, and I'll preview something that I think we'll come back to when we talk about episodes next. And it hit me this morning. Something that's missing, it's definitely missing in Encounter at Farpoint. But I think it's missing in most, if not all, of the first season. He's rarely heroic at this stage of the game. And Kirk
True.
was heroic from the beginning.
Right.
And that was an interesting contrast. And I know they're trying to contrast him with Kirk. And I accept that he's not Kirk. And I never felt like I was never like, why is he bald? Or why is he French? Or that never bothered me. Um, but I had a hard time at first understanding what his character was supposed to be, and I think that's true of the writers as well to some degree.
Yeah.
But he was definitely grumpy, and I think in some ways unnecessarily unapproachable. I didn't necessarily like the way they dealt with Riker at first. I didn't. I mean, I
Hmm.
understand not wanting kids on the ship, but I mean, dude, you took the assignment. Maybe you should like chill out a bit about it in a way that he seemed. Some of that didn't track at first. Anyway,
Right. Yeah.
but
He was definitely different from Kirk,
oh,
as you
definitely.
said,
And that's fine. That part was fun.
Yeah,
And
they made such a big deal about him not beaming down into situations.
yes, which made logical sense. I don't know that it always works story-wise.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the fact that any of the bridge crew beams down all the time probably doesn't make sense, but that's what
Right.
they do.
Yeah. Some interesting casting alternatives. We'll do this for all the characters.
Hmm.
Mitchell Ryan, sort of just like a B TV person. You know, I apparently that was a favorite for a while. I don't understand
Isn't
why.
he the one that played Riker's dad later?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, yeah.
When they played they had that.
Ambujitsu,
Ambu Jitsu. I knew you'd
the
remember that.
the highest form of martial arts, or not.
Yes. Roy Finnis, who was on a TV show, The Invaders,
Hmm.
about a covert alien invasion. I don't know. Also, again, I like thinking about their vision of the character. I wasn't sure
Yeah,
like
yeah.
why that was the actor. Really interesting one is Yaphet Kotto.
Yeah, that would have been
Yeah,
interesting.
from, people have seen him in Alien, and the TV show Homicide, Life on the Streets.
Yeah.
That would have been a very different show.
Yeah, it would have been.
He's a great actor. I
Yeah, yeah,
love
yeah,
him
yeah.
to death. I was a huge fan of him in both Alien and Homicide, but that would have been a very different show.
Very different.
Also saw from the thing you sent me, and thank you for that,
Oh
Patrick
yeah.
Bacall, who was actually
Yeah,
Belgian, so French adjacent.
sure.
Um, okay, how about Riker?
Kirk Jr.
Yeah, definitely.
And obviously Will Decker from the TNP's Phase
Yeah,
2. That's who he is.
the hands-on guy,
Yeah, yeah. He's the fresh-faced action boy.
right? They also
Um,
had thought about getting the guy who played the Rocketeer, Bill Campbell,
mhm.
for that. One of the actors in a minor role in Aliens, Michael O'Gorman. Jeffrey Combs. That would have been
Yeah, he was.
very weird.
Well, yeah, in retrospect in particular, but yeah, I mean, he wasn't on that memo that was he? I don't think the one that
I
I
don't I
found, but
don't think
that
so, but
that's an
I saw
interesting.
that in one of
I
the
have
Star
seen
Trek
that too.
books.
I've
Yeah.
seen that, yeah.
And Ben
Um,
Murphy, another kind of sort of
yeah, yeah,
TV actor. Data,
yeah.
what was your kind of initial reaction
I
to
mean,
Data?
I initially I liked Data. He was clearly kind of supposed to be Spock, but then kind of the opposite of Spock. Instead of not wanting to be less human, wanting to be more human.
Hmm.
The Pinocchio thing was obviously an important initial comp. I have thoughts about Data for later, but I mean, I like Data. Um, but he did raise some questions to me. How about yourself?
I This is a hot take. I didn't like Data when I first
Okay.
saw him. I thought that they overdid the Pinocchio like
Oh,
aspiration to be human.
okay. So
I that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I
no,
wanted him to be an alien, effectively.
yeah. I mean, okay. If we're gonna, I'm just trying to decide how much to get into this at this stage of our conversation. Yeah, I mean, I liked him. I still like him, but there are things about the character, especially over time, in some ways that have not aged well for me.
Yeah,
Not in some negative way,
yeah.
but
I'm just
just sort of
talking about like the
thinking about it.
first
But I
contact.
mean, I just saw him. He's fine. Yeah, I would like. I was hoping he would be a little more alien. And of course, in the Bible, speaking of the Bible, he was supposed to have been made by aliens, but that they obviously
Right.
changed that
Yeah.
because Brent Spiner needed to have a long-term uh, project of other characters to play over time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Casting alternatives. Mark Lindsay Chapman. What an unfortunate stage name. It sounds like too much like Mark David Chapman. Uh, Eric Menyuk, who played the Traveler later in
I could
one of
see
the
him
first
playing an
season.
android.
He could do it. And then the guy in the Predator suit in the movie Predator was
Oh,
also under
he's
consideration.
yeah. Mark Lindsay Chapman. I don't even.
Yeah.
I Googled him.
Anyway,
I don't really know who he is.
yeah, Kevin Peter Hall, the guy who was in the Predator suit, was also being considered for Geordi, according to the memo
Mm,
that you had. Dr. Crusher.
yeah.
What would you think of
She
her
was like, she's all right. That was my reaction at the time. I mean, and her character does grow over time, but I don't know. She just didn't quite do it for me, to be honest. How about you?
yeah, she was just kind of there. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, just there was no development. There's nothing interesting about her from the start, and her
No, there's
acting
not.
was not good at first. And
Yeah.
anyway, just other people they thought of Jenny Agutter, who was in Logan's Run
Looks
and
familiar.
American Werewolf in London. Um, and then just one other person they had in that memo,
Yeah,
and to me. And
yeah.
what was noticeable from that memo was they were thinking about more alternatives for male characters than female ones, which made me think they really weren't putting a lot of thought into the female characters in this show.
Oh God. So that yeah, let's talk about the Bible again. What is I mean, let me get the exact quote here for But both Tasha, all the female characters, right? Well, let let's do Beverly first. The first sentence: an extremely attractive woman in her early to mid
Yes.
40s.
Yes.
Like, well, I mean, it's what I kept thinking about is it's TV. Are you casting ugly people for TV? I just, it's. Do you have to they do the same thing
Yeah.
with Troy? The first two words in Troy's description is "and attractive."
Right.
I don't think they actually said that.
Yeah.
So I
They
guess
don't say
Y-
handsome.
Yar could have been the Uggo, I guess, because it doesn't say anything in her bio that she has to be attractive. But yeah, they don't say that,
They don't say Riker is a handsome man.
no, they don't actually. They just say he's in his early 30s and blah blah blah. It doesn't say anything about yeah,
Right.
Picard's distinguished. That's as far as that goes. I again we'll talk about episodes later, but there is an interesting there's a theme about women in that first season I think is worth commenting on. I think in some ways they're trying to be inclusive, but kind of doing it in a very ham-fisted kind of way. And this I think fits. And I think you're right. There's less sort of thought into these characters, I think. It's just we have to have
Yeah.
a doctor. It kind of feels like this. Like, okay, we know we have a captain.
Hmm.
And Roddenberry clearly is porting over um his stuff from phase two with Riker, which also kind of gives you Troy, who's kind of the Ilea character.
Right. Right.
You can't. We're not going to have. We've decided not to have a Vulcan. So
Hmm.
what's an alternative? Well, Data could be the alternative to that. We'll have
Right.
an android, and then we have to have a doctor. And I've already filled out four characters that are dudes. So let's just make the doctor a female. That seems to be the logic here,
Yeah.
and we'll figure it out later.
Well, to me, it was a lot like the TV cop shows, of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
you'd have somebody who was the coroner, and
Right.
occasionally the coroner would be there because that was an important part of the plot.
Sure.
Oh, this person was killed with a number two pencil. But that was about all that you saw of the person. I mean,
That's
and
right.
maybe like they threw in like some personal detail, that this person smokes a lot or
Hmm.
is an old army buddy of one of the
Right.
detectives or something. But otherwise, just sort of a blank. And that was my uh, reaction to Dr. Crusher, except for the name Crusher, which was something I did laugh out loud when I first heard. Sorry. Why? Why did you name this person Crusher? Okay, Tasha Yar. How about your first reaction for her?
I thought it was interesting that they actually had a security chief because they never had that
Right.
as a main character on TOS.
Good point.
Um, and she seemed okay. I don't know that I didn't. If we're talking about Encounter at Farpoint, but this is a problem that persists, she often seemed a bit excitable for no good reason.
Yeah.
And that was unfortunate. So,
Yeah, just again, it's just sort of there.
yeah, yeah,
And they only I finally found a couple of people they were thinking
right.
of in order to play that role. Rosalind Chow, who became Keiko
Keiko.
O'Brien in later episodes, and then
Yes.
DS9, and then Julia Nixon. And like I saw, like so starred on Babylon 5. No, she didn't star. She was in this incredibly minor role.
Yeah, she
Uh,
was. Yeah, she was a girlfriend at one point.
yeah, so I don't know, like the people who said that she starred in that show, what they were talking about.
Uh,
Troy, again, just like there, she had a superpower.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Superpower and accent.
yes, and is a much more interesting person in the Bible. That she was a counterweight to Picard. That she's supposed to be this incredibly smart woman
Yes.
with lots of insights. You could occasionally almost like toy with the other characters because of her intelligence. Anyway, like that's not what we got.
No, no, she becomes this sort of say the obvious thing person
Yes.
in the first season.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true.
So they went. So this is what I think is really a condemnation of the first season of the show. They went from that description in the Bible
Right.
to this incredibly bland character that the writers couldn't figure out how to make her at all useful, let alone interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, okay, Geordi.
I, you know, cool. He has a visor. That was kind of my reaction.
Yeah.
And the blind guy flying the ship didn't. I didn't find that all that amusing. So it's like, okay, he's there.
Yeah. He was again sort of like somebody with a superpower in this case. It's
Yeah.
like Iron Man. He's got a device, instead
Right.
of an innate superpower. Um, Casting alternatives, Tim Russ
Yeah, yeah.
eventually became Tuvok.
Yes.
Wesley Snipes.
Yeah, that I've seen a photo, I think of. Is there a photo of him doing a dress thing, Wesley Snipes?
Oh,
I feel like,
I don't recall. That would have been crazy because
yeah,
he would have either quit or
yeah,
would have had
yeah,
a
yeah.
very different sort of role
Oh, totally.
developed for him over time. And then the other one from the memo,
I
which
know.
I just was gobsmacked when I read this.
I
Reggie
know.
Jackson, the baseball
Yeah.
player, Kid
I mean,
October.
it almost feels that maybe there's some other guy named Reggie Jackson because that does not make any sense. Yeah, it's
Reggie
crazy.
Jackson. I don't
Yeah.
put it past him. I don't put it past him.
No, well, stunt casting, I
Worf.
guess. Worf, the thing about Worf was, oh, cool, he's a Klingon. But then for the most part, up until we get to a certain episode that we'll talk about, Heart of Glory, he's just sort of there. And early on, he starts to form which is a theme we keep talking about. He becomes like, if we need to prove an alien is tough, let them beat
Right.
up Worf. That's his role to
Right.
play.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Really kind of a third wheel. Was hard to figure out what his role was as tactical officer,
Yeah.
except to get beaten up occasionally. Heart of Glory, we'll talk a lot about that, but what a big turning point. And here it
Oh,
becomes,
yeah.
and this is the character who was in more episodes of Star Trek series than
Yeah. That's right.
any other individual. That's how interesting he became eventually.
Yes.
Um,
Well, I mean,
he,
I'll point to something to your point though about he's a tactical officer, but one of the things that I actually did not like about even the whole first season, in some ways, this problem persisted throughout the show. One thing that on TOS, you knew that Sulu was the helmsman, that Chekhov was the navigator, that Uhura was the
mhm,
communications officer, Spock was science officer. It wasn't always clear what everybody's job was. Some of them seemed
right,
interchangeable. I know there was, Khan and Helm and whatever. They didn't really quite know what it meant. I know the beginning, Geordi and Data mostly flew the ship, but sometimes Worf flew the ship, and sometimes it was somebody else. And then, it just they didn't. I I don't know if this ever answered the entire 7 years of the show. Is Data the science officer? Because I'm not sure that he is. It's just all
no,
confusing, and they never quite tell
yeah.
us the answer to that question.
Well, and there were a lot of details like that,
Yeah,
because of kind of the rigidity of the show under Roddenberry in the first season. It never like it didn't feel like they had much thought given to, well, something didn't work, let's change it, right? It's just like
that's right.
it stayed set in stone, regardless of how clunky it was. Like there was
What did
there was something in the Bible that really stood out to me that it was a big deal apparently, at least in Roddenberry's mind, that the bridge stations were programmable.
right,
I
right.
never knew they were programmable. That detail never came out for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you realize it?
I feel like it was easier to switch functions from one place to the other, but yeah, I don't know that it
Yeah,
was all
or
that
just like
clear.
configure it a little differently or something, but I never got a sense like it was programmable in the connotation
Yeah,
that you and I have now. You know,
that's right.
it was just sort of, ooh, interesting little panel there that's not
Right.
unmarked buttons like in the original series.
That's right. I mean, they did fix, for example, when they fixed Geordi and made him the engineer in season two, that was a
Yeah.
huge improvement
Yes.
because it was clear what his job was.
Hmm.
And also, well, that's another discussion for the time about the rotating attempt at engineers in season one was kind of funny, actually. But
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You spend too much time next to the warp core, bad things happen to you.
especially when you test devices near the warp core, like they were prone to do. That seemed like a
Yeah.
bad idea.
Well, and so
Anyway,
they gave such little thought to Worf that he's not even given a one paragraph description in the Bible.
no, no, no. In
Right.
fact, I feel like I remember reading at some point the idea of the Worf character was a late ad. That's why he's
Yes.
not in the Bible.
Yeah, and they weren't sure if he's going to be a recurring character or
Right,
not.
right.
Anyway, and just other like people that don't kind of just have a lot of name recognition as casting alternatives. James Avery, James Lewis Watkins.
Mm.
Uh, it it's interesting to see again how far Worf went
Oh yeah,
from
absolutely.
this, how much farther, and just what a great casting decision it was to get Michael Dorn.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And then last of all, leaving the best for last, Wesley.
Or Wesley Crusher. Yes.
What was your initial reaction of him?
I mean, I didn't, it's the scrappy do problem. I didn't really want a kid on the show.
By Scrappy Doo, that's great. That's a really good way of
Yeah,
framing him.
that was, and again, I like, you know what? I like Will Wheaton. I like the person Will Wheaton as best I can tell at a distance. And I think there may have been a way to do it better than they did, but it was obnoxious. Again, I have thoughts. We'll talk about it when we talk about some episodes later.
Yeah.
It just didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah, and as I said before, my reaction was a kid, really. I mean, how
Yeah.
forced is this? And like I don't I'm not going to connect with this show as a younger person because there's a kid in the main cast.
Well, I mean,
Now, I
how
wasn't
about
that
this?
young at the time, but
No, I mean,
if I had been 15 years old,
no, it
13
would
years
have
old, I
been.
would have been pretty freaking insulted by it.
So there was a potentially more interesting story to tell if this guy is in fact a prodigy, as the case is made in an early episode of season one. Then write him as a prodigy, not as just that they didn't do a good job of that, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's another discussion. But I could have done without Wesley.
yeah.
And I hate, in fact, for Will Wheaton's sake, he took a lot of grief for that character that I didn't think he
Oh,
deserved to
not
take.
his fault.
It
Not
wasn't
his
his
fault.
fault.
Yeah, no, I felt like
Um,
Denise Crosby. It wasn't her fault either.
no, I agree.
You know that
I don't think
she's
she's that good an actor, but definitely this show did not
well.
do her.
We'll get into that when we get into
But
the
like Will
episodes.
Wheaton, just to add a footnote to this, right? Will Wheaton had really crappy parents, and then
Hmm.
to add on because they exploited him for his money
Yes.
and
Yeah.
didn't treat him well, and he had all those problems, and then on top of that, all the negative fandom stuff that he suffered through.
Yes.
Um, and it's unfortunate in that sense. But yeah, the character didn't
And
work.
that's unforgivable to me. I mean that
Yeah, yeah,
uh, you if you can't in your mind separate the actor from the role,
that's right. That's right.
you're not a smart or a terribly compassionate person.
Correct.
One of the interesting casting alternatives for him was the actor who later played Hugh, uh,
Phew.
the deborged Borg, or the reborn, then
The
reborged,
bored to
then
deborged,
unborged.
almost reborged and unborged. The
Yes.
smorgasbord. That's who he
There
is.
we go. All right. So, except for maybe Data,
Yeah.
nobody really kind of, and maybe Riker representing, kind of a Kirk-like figure. There's a really different set of characters than the original series.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
felt at the
mean,
time.
yeah, I think that's true.
And I
Yeah.
thought that was
I mean,
great.
Data has a Spock-like element, but it's different than Riker clearly is in some ways the Kirk stand-in of a type. Otherwise, yes, it's
Yes.
all different. And they try. I mean, again, they didn't make the chief engineer a main character, which I think I understand. The goal was to shake it up a little bit, but I think that you
Mhm.
can't have a show where the ship is in danger all the time because you've got to have an engineer. You got to have those. You can't
Right.
not, and it just didn't work.
Right. And
Um,
have a chief engineer who's a temp.
yeah, and of course, with Worf and Yara, they were almost had the same kind of role together, which didn't really work too well. And then I
Mhm.
think they did make Troy is a whole new idea. The idea of a ship's counselor is not a bad idea. Although it occurred to me as I was writing my notes, she should have been Dr. Troy, shouldn't she have? Shouldn't she have
Oh,
probably had
that's
a
a very interesting point. Yes.
um, anyway, they didn't think some of this through, I don't think. I think some of this always felt like, how about this? And I think we'll come back to this when we talk about episodes. for season one. And we talk about other seasons as we go down this journey over however long it takes to get through this journey. A lot of this feels like a rough draft that didn't get polished the entire first season,
Right.
right? We know we want to have an empath who's a counselor, but that's kind of as far as we're going to go in terms of developing the concept. We know we want Riker to be the away team guy. We want Yara to be the action girl. That's all we kind of, then we'll just go with it from there. And we don't, some of this doesn't get figured out in some cases for a couple of seasons, but certainly like Worf's a good example in season one. We don't get a good Worf episode. We get one. It's really good.
And then nothing
And then nothing, right?
for a while.
For a while. And then we get a lot. But
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Ronald D. Moore. But anyway.
Yeah. I just had a thought about Troy, actually. I wanted to pitch to you. She could have been like a nicer version of Avon from Blake 7. I mean, somebody who was really a counterweight to the captain.
Yeah.
It really called his decisions into question sometimes when they needed
Sexy
to be
Avon.
Sexy Avon. Now you put that in my head. And that would have been interesting, that that Starfleet had a different model for leadership on on ships like the Enterprise. All right.
Yeah, I don't think I don't, because putting her on the bridge, not just putting her on the bridge, but putting her right next to the captain suggests that she's supposed to be giving advice on a regular basis. She doesn't entirely do that job, not in a way that beyond, again, because what I used to think is when I watched the show the first time, okay, so are all the counselors empaths and their job is to go, the Ferengi are being dishonest? I mean, what if it's a human counselor? They don't have that. They're not empathic, or even like, and I feel like this was in one of the novels. It's a great idea to have a Vulcan counselor. That's a whole different ballgame, right?
Right.
So I just don't know. It was almost like, again, they knew they wanted a counselor, and they knew they wanted her on the bridge, and then they wanted to be an empath, and they didn't think about it beyond that, really.
So they should have taken one of the Star Trek role-playing games,
Yeah.
created a scenario, and had people play it out, and then see what the strengths and weaknesses of these character designs were.
I mean,
That's what should have happened.
What if Worf is the counselor? That would be much more interesting.
Oh no, but he fumbles. And he's out of the show. All right. So what we didn't know was there was an alternative to
it was like
that was Star Trek Phase 2 in the late 70s. That
there was like some mythology about this, but not a lot was known about it.
Yeah, we didn't really know much about it. Do you think that this was a better starting point for a new series than Phase 2?
I mean, ultimately, yes, especially given the timeline here, right? If Phase 2 had premiered on this new Paramount network that they wanted to premiere in the mid 1970s, we never would have gotten the movies, probably.
Right.
And it might have been canceled, even if the show itself did well. The network might not have done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that might have been the end of Star Trek at that point, at least on screen.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that this was a much better way to do this.
Oh, definitely. I think that you would have had too much connection to the original series. It would have felt like beating Star Trek to death after a while. As you said, the movies wouldn't have been a possibility. They would have, I think, set a bad precedent that you had to cleave too closely to the original series with everything that was to come.
Right.
I think it would have been a harder sell to do the next generation ultimately. Anyway, I'm glad there wasn't a Phase 2.
Yeah, I mean, and based on what I've read about Phase 2, the stories that they proposed did not seem necessarily like a good idea in many cases.
Not much better than the animated series, is what you're saying?
Maybe not as good as the animated series. I think that this unique circumstance. So you already have 87. The show premieres. The movie, the fourth movie, has just made the most money of any of the movies. So that's riding high. So it's as a property, as a money-making proposition, it's a positive scenario, right?
Hmm.
Then you get the business decision to put this on syndication, which created a different kind of metric of success, right? Instead of having to win your time slot if it was on NBC at 8 o'clock on a Thursday, which it wouldn't have been at that time, that would have been Cheers or something. But anyway, if it were on, it had to win its time slot, right? Not
Right.
just then also where was it in the Nielsen ratings would have mattered greatly, but being syndicated, it could be any various times of the day. You could accumulate that audience, and also the metric was not Nielsen ratings, but really were you winning syndication? And it did win syndication, right? It was like the number one syndicated show, I believe, at the time,
Hmm.
or near there too. So it created a different kind of context for success, and I think that helped it grow, uh, and then why we got more Trek that we got at the time.
Right. And I think before we wrap up, I just wanted to make a comparison to where Star Wars was at the same
Hmm.
moment. So Star Wars, they had the original three movies that came and went, and
Yep.
other than a cartoon, did like the Droids cartoon come out before
I mean,
87?
the only other I don't maybe then. I mean, we had the Ewok TV movies. I mean, that was the kind of stuff
Well,
that
yeah,
was
the,
getting.
the infamous, holiday special and so forth. But really,
Well,
it was
that
it
was
was
before. But I mean, there
yeah,
were
but it was
two Ewok
only
movies.
right. It was only the Star Wars trilogy at this point. And
Right.
Star Wars did not have a bustling kind of aftermarket sort of set of books and comics and so forth. Comics to a little extent, but anyway, there wasn't anything like if you were a Star Wars fan,
Yeah.
being able to kind of dip yourself into this vast ocean of material beyond the kind of the prime mover, which was the Star Trek series in one case and the Star Wars movies in the other. There wasn't any extended universe yet, as I could tell. It was mostly actually kind of treated as a children's IP at that time, where Star Trek was
Yeah,
considered to
that's
be a grown-up franchise.
yeah, I think that's totally right. So like Star Wars Droids was a cartoon that was 85, 86. Um, you don't get the extended universe novels until later in the decade, 99, the next
Hmm.
decade actually.
Yeah.
Um, the two Ewok movies I'm talking about, I forgot it was called Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure was 84, and Ewoks, The Battle of Endor was 85. So yeah, it was basically a kid's property. And then any promise of, oh, I take that back. That wasn't right. That was the books, wrong books. I didn't sound right. Hang on.
But anyway, there wasn't a lot there
No, there
as a
wasn't. There
Star
was
Wars
not.
fan. In fact, I remember like when the Star Wars role-playing game came out, it was it was like, a drink of water during a long trek through the desert, with some, a lot of existing material, something new, a role-playing game that you didn't have before. So in contrast, you had this vast Star Trek universe, that was a creation of both, officially sanctioned people who had the license to do computer games and comics and books and so forth, as well as the
Right.
fan's own contribution to sustaining Star Trek. So when they did want to make a big break with the next generation, it was, from a very firm foundation.
Right. No, I agree. Star Wars was it felt like it was in the wilderness at that point in time. And in fact, it seemed like we wouldn't really get anything else, right? That it was
Right.
just gone.
All right. Well, let's
I know
get
someone's
to
going to correct us on that story. I can't find what I want.
don't worry about it.
Well, I got
And
a
that
screen.
will invalidate everything else that we've said in
Of
this
course,
episode. Of
that's all
course.
that matters. That's all that
Yes.
matters.
Aha! You are not a true fan if you don't know about this obscure Ewoks movie.
No, that one I got the Ewok movie thing.
I know. I'm just saying. I
Uh,
just kind of picking at random. Kind of like what peripheral knowledge you need to
at the
have in order to be considered
the
a fan in
at the
some
Bantha
people's eyes.
carcass.
At the Bantha carcass. All right.
Yes.
So we're going to change our wrap up question a little bit. We're just going to kind of again stay focused on 1987.
Right.
In 1987, what was your favorite piece of original series related merchandise when TNG premiered?
So probably my favorite piece of TNG merchandise in 1987 would have been the Starfleet Technical Manual that I had. That would be the most valued piece of Trek merch that I had. That was TOS related.
Yeah, I that's a good one. That might make me rethink things. I actually for me it was the blueprints. I thought
Yeah,
that
those are
those were
good.
incredibly cool to find where different parts of the Enterprise were in relationship to what we saw from the outside of the model, including
Is
the
that what we
bowling
thought?
alley.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you. Yeah, bowling alley. Yeah.
The bowling alley. That's the most 60s thing you could
Oh,
possibly
totally,
imagine. Yeah, throwing in
totally.
the bowling alley. Do you still have the technical manual?
Yeah, I definitely have a technical manual. I wanted the original, like in the plastic, that
Yeah.
plastic, black plastic cover. Yeah, I've got it still.
Yeah, I lost the blueprints in a move. I
I think I have the blueprint
tragically.
still too, but I
Yeah.
definitely have or maybe I've got the blueprints I have right now are the ones from TMP because there was a different set that was published. I'll have to look
Yeah.
and find it.
But they were so cool. You pull them out and they
Oh yeah, yeah.
felt like real blueprints. You had to
Oh
unfold
sure.
them and they were big. And anyway,
Yes. Yeah.
so what TNG merchandise from the time of the first season do you still have, if anything?
Um, I have some stills and I have an autographed that con that I went to, which would have been a little. I don't. Again, I'm assuming 88, 89, no later than 89. Autographed picture of the Loxana Troy by Majel Barrett.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything. I didn't have a lot. I mean, I was, kind of in college and,
Right.
wasn't spending a lot of money on merch at the time. I certainly had a t-shirt, but I don't
Mhm.
have it anymore. That's not the kind of thing that survives a lot of washings
No,
over the
no,
course
no.
of decades. Was there any TNG merchandise you'd say you wish you had?
Despite the fact that maybe dissed the D earlier, I wouldn't mind a nice little model of the D, small one for the desk.
Yeah, I had like a die cast one of those.
Uh,
I wish I still had it. It actually had like the saucer separation you could do.
right.
I wish I could go back and resurrect that. That was something I purged, but it'd be nice on a bookshelf.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next time we're going to do the episodes of the first
Yes.
season and dive into, again, a lot of our feelings about the characters, about the writing, you name it, we'll talk about it. But that's next time on Ancient Geeks.
See you then.
Once again, we're grateful that you've joined us for an episode of Ancient Geeks. Thanks for listening. Wherever you find this podcast, we'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe and leave us a review. We're always welcoming feedback, and if you want to give it to us directly, drop us a line at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. You can also find us on our Substack, someancientgeek.substack.com, where we post regularly, and we're also on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All contents copyright 2026, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.
Gene's ideas about the future and about man are wacky doodle.